Hey everyone, and welcome to Ricky's Rockin' Reviews. Now I think I finally cracked my top 10 reads of 2023. It was a really difficult undertaking. I read 28 books this year, but after a couple of drafts, I think I'm finally happy with what I selected. I first wanted to mention some honorable mentions. The first one is On Writing Well by William Zinsser. Now there's a reason why this has sold millions of copies. It's a masterclass on how to write effectively. Even though it says this is about how to write really good nonfiction, you could use these principles in any form of writing. At least that's how I see it. Because he includes several excerpts from his own articles, from other people's articles, from memoirs and other forms of journalism, where it really proves that even though I'm not interested in any of the subjects that they're writing about, I found myself really engaged because in each of these examples and in each of the things he was writing about here, he shows that if you write clearly, if you include the best word choice and you exclude unnecessary words and you put a little bit of yourself in something, it's always going to come across and engage the reader. So it was phenomenal. And the only reason I'm including it as an honorable mention is because this was the only nonfiction book that I read this year. So I thought it wouldn't be right to include it with so much fiction. I have so many books on history and other nonfiction books here that I want to get to. If I got to some of these books and I read more nonfiction, I would be able to include it in the overall top 10, but just not yet. My next honorable mention is Mr. X by Peter Straub. Now this is a father-son horror drama, I would say, and I don't want to get too into what happens in here, but it's a chunkster. It's like 500 pages long. And I found myself really immersed in the family history. There's a peculiar family in here, and it gets very meta. All I would say is if you're a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, if you have any working knowledge of the Dunwich horror stuff and that part of H.P. Lovecraft in Necronomicon, you're going to really enjoy this book. There's a lot of callbacks to that. I thought it was a really interesting novel. However, I don't think it really stuck the landing. And although I was really engaged, part of the reason was because I was just trying to keep up with what was going on. And I felt like if it was a little bit more clear, it would have been a little bit more powerful. But nonetheless, I really enjoyed the book. So now getting into my top 10, my number 10 read of the year is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This story really grabs you early on because you meet Abby and Gretchen and you see how they kind of collide and they become best friends early on in their childhood. You get to witness some coming of age tropes as they grow up together, but you also get to see this crazy possession story happen or unfold for them as well. And what I really liked was how unpredictable it was, especially in the third act. There's a section where it feels like a slasher film. It feels like John Carpenter's Halloween from the 70s. And I was not expecting some of the things that happen in here. Especially when it comes to the exorcist himself, is definitely not what you would expect, but it really worked. And I also really liked, of course, the style and the retro feel. It's very 80s. It takes place in the 80s, I should mention, and each chapter title is a song title from the 80s. It says That's What Friends Are For right here. You got Don't Stop Believing, Parents Just Don't Understand, Total Eclipse of the Heart, and stuff like that. Coming in at number 9 is Old Too Soon by Brian Boyer. This is a book about a girl who comes from an abusive household. Her father has just passed away. So you witness her grow up starting at the age of 11. She falls into the hands of some really bad people and she becomes an alcoholic very early on in her life to numb some voices that she mentions. Now, the reason this is number 9 on my list is because although it is transgressive fiction that leans in on the shock value and some gore, it has a really poetic through line in my opinion and is able to pull off a really good ending. As well as I was just here for all of the moments where our protagonist, Cadence, has moments of peace. And I was just so invested in her trying to find her happiness. Now, coming in at number 8 is a book I have on my Kindle called The Cartoon Life and Loves of a Stupid Man. This is a really interesting novel by Mark Jones. The reason I really love this book is because of the beautiful prose in it. It's just so unique in the way that it's told. It's told from the point of view of a man who is kind of mentally unwell, but he's a comic book artist and he owns a comic book shop, and he's just a really creative person, but he has to take these pills because of his mental illness, and he becomes reluctant to take them, and he stops taking them, and it unravels his life with his wife, and he becomes extremely jealous of a man that he calls George Clooney because he is so handsome. It leans on some of the humor, but it also gets incredibly dark in places that it just keeps you on your toes. And I just really liked how the story is told, as far as this unwell man is viewing his life in a book, a comic book. And so as he's describing the things that are happening and the way that he's feeling, the art of the book that he's holding in his hands changes. It's just really fascinating. You get descriptions of the different splashes of color on the panels, the word boxes, the word blurbs, and of course color and texture and everything. And so it just really intrigued me. So that's why it makes number 8 on my list. Coming in at number 7, we have the Hulk 2003 novelization based on the film by Ang Lee, written by Peter David. Now, this is such a cool novelization. I always loved the Hulk 2003 film, but I feel like it's very misunderstood. But I still admit that there are some problems with that movie. There are certain aspects to that film that feel very disjointed, especially when it comes to character interactions and the character dynamics between Betty and Bruce and Thunderbolt Ross. It all feels a little bit half-baked. This book really clears all that stuff up. It really opens up the personal aspects of the characters, and that's what ends up making this story feel way more cohesive. And there are some portions of this book where Peter David really gets into the Hulk psyche, not just Bruce Banner. And in those passages is some of the most beautiful prose that I've read when it comes to anything science fiction related or anything from a superhero. And I just really love seeing that. And I feel like with Peter David's history on the character, he was really able to make sure that some of the things that didn't come across in the film came across here. And it just made me feel complete inside as a Hulk fan and as a superhero fan. And so that's why that makes number 7 on my list. Now coming in at number 6 is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This has to be one of the best covers that I've seen in a long time. And the story in here does not disappoint. It's kind of a murder mystery for a murder that happened, or murders I should say, that happened a long time ago. There's this old lady that's living on the edge of a cliff where she lives in a mansion, and her entire family died one night and she was the only one left. But now she's bedridden and she can't move at all. She's pretty much a vegetable. She only has the use of one of her hands, I believe. She needs a nurse, a full-time nurse, to help her out. So this girl who's desperate for work goes and ends up working here and ends up learning about this woman's past. And there's a typewriter in here which drives the story. There's sections of the story that are told from Lenora when she gets her hand on the typewriter. And it was just a genius way of like unraveling this story, because there was a lot of elements that felt like horror, like straight up horror. And that typewriter freaked me out, especially since this felt like a haunted house. I don't want to give too much away, but just the way that it was told, Lenora sitting there on the typewriter, typing messages. This was just a thoroughly creepy book with so many twists. Basically, we get flashbacks told in her typewriting sessions, and these typewriting sessions are included, and it looks like actual typewriter text. And every time we got to those portions, I was just eating it up. It just really heightened the story, because everything that was going on back then starts to bubble up in the present. It was just really fun to read. Coming in at number 5, we have probably the most irreverent book on the list. This book was wild. This is called The Hands of Onan by Chris D'Elia. If you know anything about the story of Onan from the Bible, it has to deal with self-pleasure, and you can kind of get a gist of what's going on in the cover. I won't go into it that much, but basically it's about a cult of self-pleasure, if you will, for men. Our main character in here is such a funny guy. He's a writer, and he's addicted to pleasuring himself. And through one way or another, he ends up finding this cult of self-pleasure. And it's just such a wild ride. I didn't know where it was going. Now, the main character, Mike, really drove the story. He was hilarious, and he reminded me a lot of the main character from Bad Monkey. Now, a couple of reasons why I like this book so much is because of the subject matter that is really shied away from and not really explored in other things. So it just felt incredibly fresh. And for that reason, it lent itself to the next point that I really liked, which was our main character here had this fascination with what was going on with this cult. And it's the same way that you feel as a reader. You're just dying to know what is coming. You're just dying to know what this cult is after. You just have to see what is going on with this cult. Now, this book doesn't shy away from some of the things that you would imagine you'd see on here. There's a lot of nudity, a lot of big O's. Now, even though this book would seem funny to some people just because of its subject matter that's not really explored so much, it also touches on some pretty important things, as well as balancing this fine line between this person who is investigating this cult per se and the cult themselves and what separates them, because the main character is all about self-pleasure as well. The way I would describe this is kind of like a horror thriller, especially towards the end. You even get a little bit of action here too. Like traditional action is what I mean. I won't get into it anymore. But that's number 5, The Hands of Onan by Chris D'Elia. Now, coming in at my number 4 read of the year is one of the best villains in the Marvel Universe. We have The Harrowing of Doom by David Annandale. This was such a phenomenal take on Doctor Doom. Now, Doctor Doom is known as one of the most powerful villains, if not the most powerful villain in the Marvel Universe. He kind of reminds me a lot of the Green Lantern in the DC Universe when it comes to willpower. It has come to be known that whatever Doctor Doom sets his mind on, he is able to achieve just through willpower and his intellect and his knowledge of the mystic arts, of course. But it's that will inside of him that makes people kneel to him, that makes the people in Latveria nearly worship him. They do worship him. This book goes into detail about Latveria and the country that he rules, as well as some of the people that work closely with him, I should say. Definitely the best thing about this book is just the way Doctor Doom was written. I mean, just the aura in each page that includes him completely changes. For example, all the people that he's talking to feel fear, but they also feel more capable as well. He instills this level of self-worth and courage into each of his Latverians. We have Zargo here, who is a priest, and he's a secondary character, but he was my second favorite character in here. He is coming to terms with his church and his priesthood and the oath that he made to his church, and this ability to practice some dark art, or magic, I should say, when it comes to these ley lines that run through the earth. It's a really good story because in here we have Doctor Doom, who is essentially trying to get his mother back from the jaws, or the depths of hell, I should say. After his mother had to make a deal with the devil, basically, a really tough choice back in the day to save her country. Dr. Doom is on a mission to get her back, no matter what it takes. He's able to tap into some really dark magic, mystical stuff, as well as integrate some of his advanced technology to try to make that happen. And what follows is just a riveting story about Dr. Doom trying to get revenge on his mother. And what makes it so powerful is that who he's facing off against is essentially the devil and hell itself. It just goes bonkers. It's just absolutely enthralling. I read the other books in the series. There's 3. There is The Reign of the Devourer, which picks up a little bit where this first one leaves off. And then we also have The Tyrant Skies. And The Tyrant Skies was also so good. There's just something's holding it back. If I could, I would include this whole series as my number 4, but number 1 is clearly the strongest. Now, number 3 is a book that I don't have, but I'll put it right here. I read it from the library. It's called Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. Now, this was an enthralling read. If I could describe it to you really simply, it's Jurassic Park meets mermaids out at sea on this giant expedition, on this kind of like a cruise liner, but made essentially just to research the depths of the ocean. We have so many characters in here, and they are all really worth being on the page. And I really like the way they all interact with each other and the alliances that are made and the enemies that are kind of made as well. We have a really interesting setup. We have a story about this channel that's a lot like the Sci-Fi Channel. They go out and they make these like mockumentaries of different cryptoids and cryptids. They decide to do one about mermaids, and it turns out that maybe mermaids are real, and their first expedition gets mauled and messed up, and there's no survivors. So this story picks up a few years after that, and we have some people that were attached to that first voyage, whether it be a sister or we have a doctor who dedicated her life to study mermaids or ancient mermaids because she believes that they're real. We also have people that work in sonar and videography and in deep diving, or all of their stories basically intertwine so that they can pull off this expedition. Like I said, the way the characters are interacting and the way they're interwoven with each other was just pulled off pitch perfectly. There are moments that felt really scary, and the slow reveal of the mermaids or what these creatures are is just done expertly. And some of the highest points that a thriller can achieve is increasingly raising the stakes as the story progresses. And that's exactly what happens here. There's so many secrets that the production company is withholding from the scientists who signed up for this second expedition. And there are so many different motivations from each of the characters that just kept the story really fresh all the way to the end. And I just thought it was just a masterfully done thriller. Now, coming in at number 2, this is I Remember You by Yrsa Sigurðardóttir. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but this is an Icelandic author who typically writes crime fiction, but this is a straight up ghost story. It tells you right there on the front. Now, what was so effective about this book was how fresh it feels, because it does really feel like a crime novel, but it is a ghost story. And now I really liked how these two genres came together and they created this new atmosphere. And it felt like nothing I've ever really read before. We have this doctor who ends up getting pulled into this police investigation where this elderly woman committed suicide. And as this investigation is unfolding, he realizes that this woman had a lot of recollections and knew a lot about his son, who has passed away several years prior. This story really just ends up developing, and it feels like a noir. And we get pulled into this mystery because there is also a second story where these 3 friends are in this remote, isolated town. And they're trying to renovate this home, but they go there at the worst time, and it's like in the dead winter, and some creepy stuff starts happening in the place that they're staying. And as we have our main character trying to solve this case and trying to look into how this old woman knew so many things about his son, we get this haunting story over here at this remote location where these 3 friends are. And it starts to feel like a race against the clock as these 2 stories start becoming intertwined. Now, although this is a ghost story, because of the way that it's written, it just feels like a really cold noir because it takes place in the winter, of course. So, I mean, I just really remember this scaring the crap out of me. And I thought it just achieved everything it wanted to achieve. I thought it was very poignant, poetic, and real. Some of the best moments are when the doctor character is reflecting on his past and also trying to internalize this grief that he's having, that he's still coming to terms with. It just becomes just really sad as well. But it also sticks the landing. I thought that the ending was really perfect, really well done, and it kind of shows that there's like a cyclical nature to things that sometimes we just can't help. So that's my number 2. I Remember You. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, my number 1 read of the year is actually a collection of short stories called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. This is the great Raymond Carver, and I read it in this Library of America edition that collects all of Raymond Carver's work. Here we have the little insert of Raymond Carver. He's one of my favorite authors. Now, I read Will You Please Be Quiet Please last year. It was my first deep dive into Raymond Carver, and that was such a treat. And this collection was no different. The best way I can describe Raymond Carver's writing is that it feels like when you zoom in on a picture and you zoom in so much that you can't even see what you were originally looking at, because what you are so zoomed in on feels like extremely chaotic, because whatever's making up this finer picture looks like a bunch of shattered different pieces in this localized area that you're looking at. So Raymond Carver was an American author who wrote a lot about the tedium of suburban life and some of the universal things that everyone kind of deals with when it comes to like heartache, loss, regret, and hurting the people that you love, and trying to come to terms with some of your own selfish impulses. And here in What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, a lot of the stories that are in here have to deal with alcoholism and destroying the relationship that you're in, being self-destructive, and then also the harm that we end up doing to each other, and definitely not learning from your own mistakes, and not being privy to the way other people feel around you. But when you're only looking at such a localized piece, it looks like all these little pieces are like fragments that exploded. And so that's what Raymond Carver does with so many random moments in someone's life or in someone's recollection of memories. And in these moments, he concentrates so much of a character's previous experience and so much buildup of someone's resentment or unresolved issues, and he pressurizes it. And what happens is there's either an explosion of emotion or there's an implosion, and there's just like this somber, poignant realization that sometimes things are not going to resolve, and kind of an acceptance that everyone is in this constant state of anxiety when it comes to relationships and love. Sometimes there's a realization that we ourselves are the ones that have to change and to make things right, even though we can be extremely reluctant, and a lot of times we'll refuse to do so. There are moments of happiness in some of these short stories, but wherever we see that, there's always this layer of uneasiness. So I feel like what comes across the most in all these stories is like this discomfort in not knowing what other people are thinking, and a failure of communicating what's going on inside, because a lot of the times we don't even know ourselves. It also doesn't help that sometimes we pick up some really bad habits, or at least the characters in here, they have bad habits like alcoholism. Infidelity is also another one. But it's all just written so well. I consider myself really, really happy with where I am in my life and in my relationship with my wife. But I can't disregard the beauty in the writing when it comes to these stories, and just some general truths that come across when it comes to our insecurities at no matter what level. Like I said, in these stories, he zooms in on those, and it makes it feel way more chaotic than it is. Like I said, we're all made up of moments and specific stages of our life or periods of time where it feels extremely tough for us. And whether it be these pressures that are on us during these moments, or the frustration of us trying to find the answers during these times, it all leads to this feeling that we are misunderstood, or feel that people are incapable of understanding. And so you get this feeling of being alone. But that's not, of course, that's not always true. I feel like no matter what the subject matter was for each of the stories, the writing was always immaculate. And I think my favorite part of each of the stories and Raymond Carver's writing and what we talk about when we talk about love is his ability to infuse all of his stories with details that become really symbolic when you take a moment to ponder them. And in the inclusion of these details, you see that despite the sentences being very bare bones and very cold feeling at times, Carver is able to express so much. You just have to think about it. And in this way, I feel like Raymond Carver's writing is a lot like John Steinbeck's, but just on different ends of the spectrum. Where in John Steinbeck's writing, we see a clarity when it comes to the depiction of hope and perseverance. Steinbeck sees a lot of the beauty in things, where on the other end of the spectrum we have Raymond Carver, who is able to elicit feelings of anxiety and desperation with his simple sentence structure. So both of these authors are able to show us human truths that are just on different sides of each other, and that's why they're my favorite authors. One of the things that Raymond Carver does very well is just kind of like planting you into a scene where you're kind of discombobulated and you have to piece together what is happening. There's a lot of subtext when it comes to what has happened in the immediate past and or just the past in general with these characters, and how they're trying to see a way towards reconciliation, basically. So even though these are short stories, your mind is always kind of working, trying to unravel what's going on and why are these characters are so emotional or emotionless. Hence why I actually need to do a review of what we talk about when we talk about love, so I can go into detail on each of the stories and the feelings they elicited from me. But guys, those are my top 10 reads of 2023. I'm really excited to see what I end up reading in 2024. And I'm really excited about my growth as a reader in general. I want to be able to read more books, and I want to be able to read different kinds of books. But I definitely want to make some changes from my reading in 2023. I'll probably make a video about that. So guys, please leave a comment down below if you've read any of these books or if you're thinking about reading these books now. And if you would be so kind, if you could leave your top 10 list in the comments below. I'm really curious to see what everyone else has been reading. And just catch me on the next one, guys.